The morning sun cast long shadows across the military academy grounds as Sarah Martinez adjusted the weight of her combat pack for what felt like the 100th time. At 19 years old, and standing barely 5 feet 4 inches tall, she cut an unimposing figure among the towering cadets around her. The crisp autumn air carried the familiar sounds of military life, drill sergeants barking orders, boots marching in perfect synchronization, and the distant rumble of armored vehicles conducting training exercises. Sarah had dreamed of this moment since she was 12 years old, watching her older brother Marcus return from his deployment overseas. He had told her stories of courage, brotherhood, and the unbreakable bonds formed in the crucible of combat. Those tales had planted a seed in her young mind that grew into an unwavering determination to serve her country. But now, surrounded by cadets who seemed born for military life, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was an imposter wearing a uniform too big for her small frame. The academy had accepted her application with some reluctance. Her physical fitness scores were adequate but not exceptional, and her slight build raised questions about her ability to handle the rigorous demands of military service. During her interview, Colonel Harrison had looked at her with barely concealed skepticism, asking pointed questions about her motivations and whether she truly understood what she was signing up for. Sarah had answered with conviction, but she could see the doubt in his eyes, the same doubt she now encountered daily from her peers and instructors. Her roommate, Jessica Chen, was everything Sarah felt she was not. Jessica stood 6 feet tall with broad shoulders and the kind of natural athleticism that made every physical challenge look effortless. She had grown up in a military family, with both parents serving as officers and her grandfather having fought in 3 different conflicts. Military terminology rolled off her tongue as naturally as breathing, and she carried herself with the confident bearing of someone who had never questioned their place in the world. During their first week of training, Sarah struggled with the obstacle course that most other cadets completed with relative ease. The rope climb proved particularly challenging, her smaller stature making it difficult to maintain the momentum needed to reach the top efficiently. As she hung there, muscles burning and breathing heavily, she could hear snickers from some of the male cadets who had finished minutes earlier. "Maybe she should try cheerleading instead," one of them muttered, loud enough for her to hear but quiet enough to avoid official notice. The comment stung, but Sarah gritted her teeth and continued climbing. She eventually reached the top, though her time was among the slowest in the group. Instructor Sergeant Williams made note of her performance on his clipboard, his expression unreadable but far from encouraging. Academic classes presented their own challenges. While Sarah excelled in subjects like military history and tactical theory, she struggled with the more technical aspects of weapons maintenance and battlefield communications. The equipment seemed designed for larger hands, and the complex radio systems felt foreign despite hours of study. Her classmates, many of whom had grown up around military hardware, picked up these skills with frustrating ease. During one particularly difficult session on field communications, Sarah fumbled with the radio settings while her squad waited for her to establish contact with the command post. The seconds ticked by agonizingly slowly as she tried to remember the correct frequency and call signs. Finally, Cadet Johnson, a tall boy from Texas with a deep drawl and an easy confidence, stepped forward. "Here, let me show you," he said, not unkindly, but with the patronizing tone of someone explaining something to a child. He took the radio and had the connection established within moments. "Thanks," Sarah mumbled, feeling the heat of embarrassment creep up her neck. "No problem, Martinez. We all have our strengths," Johnson replied, but his words carried an implication that communication clearly wasn't one of hers. The social dynamics at the academy were complex and often brutal. Cadets were encouraged to work as a team, but there was also an underlying competition for recognition and advancement. Sarah found herself caught between trying to prove herself individually and contributing to group success. More often than not, her efforts to help seemed to slow down her teammates rather than assist them. During PT sessions, she would finish her runs, several minutes behind the lead pack, arriving red-faced and gasping, while others looked as though they had barely broken a sweat. The push-up and sit-up tests were particular sources of anxiety, as her scores consistently hovered just above the minimum requirements. She would spend extra hours in the gym, pushing her body to its limits, but the gains came slowly and with tremendous effort. One evening, as Sarah was attempting to improve her pull-up performance on the outdoor bar behind the dormitory, Jessica approached her. The taller girl had been watching from a distance, and Sarah braced herself for another well-meaning but ultimately patronizing offer of help. "You know," Jessica said, leaning against a nearby fence post, "you don't have to prove anything to these idiots." Sarah dropped from the bar, surprised by the comment. "What do you mean?" "I mean, half these guys are here because their daddies were military, and they never had to question whether they belonged. You're here because you chose to be, and that's harder." It was the first genuinely supportive thing anyone had said to Sarah since arriving at the academy, and she felt an unexpected surge of gratitude toward her roommate. "Doesn't feel that way when I'm failing every physical challenge," Sarah replied, wiping sweat from her forehead. "Physical strength isn't everything. I've been watching you in the classroom and during tactical exercises. You notice things other people miss. You ask questions that make instructors think. That counts for something." Sarah wanted to believe Jessica's words, but the daily reality of academy life made it difficult. Every morning brought new challenges that highlighted her perceived weaknesses. The rifle range was another source of frustration. While she was accurate enough to meet standards, her smaller frame made it difficult to maintain steady positions for extended periods. The recoil from the larger weapons left her shoulder aching, and she had to work twice as hard to achieve the same level of proficiency as her peers. The worst part wasn't the physical challenges themselves, but the way they affected how others saw her. She could sense the resignation in her instructors' voices when they called on her for demonstrations. Her fellow cadets had begun to unconsciously exclude her from informal training groups, not out of malice, but from a practical assumption that she would slow them down. During a field exercise designed to test small unit tactics, Sarah was assigned to a squad led by Cadet Morrison, a serious young man from Colorado who took everything about military service with utmost gravity. The exercise involved navigating through a wooded area, locating and neutralizing mock enemy positions, and extracting to a designated rally point within a specified time limit. Sarah's squad moved through the forest with careful precision, Morrison directing their movements with hand signals and whispered commands. When they encountered their first objective, a bunker position manned by instructors playing enemy forces, Morrison assigned Sarah to provide security while the rest of the squad flanked the position. Security duty meant lying prone at the edge of the tree line, watching for enemy reinforcements that everyone knew weren't coming. It was a safe assignment that kept her out of the way while the more capable members of the squad handled the actual tactical work. Sarah understood the implicit message. She wasn't trusted with anything important. The squad successfully completed their mission, but Sarah's contribution had been minimal. During the after-action review, Morrison praised the performance of individual team members, mentioning everyone except Sarah. It wasn't intentional cruelty, just an accurate assessment that she hadn't done anything worth noting. These experiences began to wear on Sarah's confidence in ways she hadn't anticipated. She had expected physical challenges and knew she would have to work harder than most to meet military standards. What she hadn't prepared for was the psychological toll of constantly being underestimated and gradually accepting those low expectations herself. Her academic performance remained strong, particularly in subjects requiring analytical thinking and attention to detail. She consistently scored among the top students in military history, and her essays on tactical theory earned praise from instructors. But these successes felt hollow when contrasted with her struggles in practical applications. During one particularly difficult week, Sarah's parents visited for a scheduled family day. Her mother immediately noticed the change in her daughter's demeanor. The bright enthusiasm that had characterized Sarah's departure for the academy had been replaced by a quiet determination tinged with doubt. "How are you really doing, sweetheart?" her mother asked during a private moment while they walked across the academy grounds. Sarah considered giving the standard positive response she had been providing in her weekly phone calls home. Instead, she found herself opening up about her struggles and the growing sense that she might not belong in military service after all. "Maybe Colonel Harrison was right to question my application," she admitted. "Maybe I'm just not cut out for this." Her mother stopped walking and turned to face her daughter directly. "Sarah Martinez, I have never known you to give up on anything you truly wanted. Remember when you decided to learn piano at age 10? You practiced for hours every day for 2 years until you could play Chopin. Remember when you wanted to make the varsity soccer team despite being the smallest girl trying out? You trained all summer and earned that spot through pure determination. "This is different, Mom. Those were individual achievements. Here, other people depend on me, and I keep letting them down." "Are you letting them down? Or are they not giving you the chance to show what you can contribute?" The question stayed with Sarah long after her parents departed. She began to examine her experiences at the academy through a different lens, considering whether her perceived failures were actually reflections of her capabilities or symptoms of a system that didn't know how to utilize her particular strengths. This shift in perspective didn't immediately change her daily experiences, but it began to alter how she responded to them. Instead of simply accepting assignments like security duty during tactical exercises, she started volunteering for more challenging roles. When squad leaders tried to give her the safe jobs, she politely but firmly requested opportunities to contribute more meaningfully. The change in her approach was subtle but noticeable. During a night navigation exercise, instead of accepting the role of rear security, Sarah volunteered to be the primary navigator. Morrison hesitated, clearly preferring to assign the critical job to someone he considered more reliable. But Sarah's quiet insistence eventually convinced him to give her the chance. The exercise took place in unfamiliar terrain, under overcast skies that blocked most starlight. Using only a compass and topographical map, Sarah had to guide her squad through several miles of rough country to locate 3 checkpoints before reaching their final destination. It was the kind of precise, detail-oriented task that played to her intellectual strengths rather than her physical limitations. As they moved through the darkness, Sarah found herself genuinely enjoying the challenge. The careful attention to compass bearings, the mental calculations required to account for magnetic declination, and the constant cross-referencing with terrain features all engaged her mind in ways that purely physical challenges did not. For the first time since arriving at the academy, she felt truly competent at something that mattered. When they reached the first checkpoint ahead of schedule, Morrison expressed surprised approval. By the time they located the 3rd checkpoint, having maintained nearly perfect navigation accuracy throughout the exercise, even the most skeptical members of the squad were beginning to look at Sarah differently. The successful navigation exercise marked a subtle turning point in how Sarah's classmates perceived her. Word of her performance spread among the cadets, and she noticed small changes in how they interacted with her. Johnson, the cadet who had taken over the radio during her earlier struggle, approached her after a particularly difficult map-reading class to ask for help understanding topographical symbols. These small victories began to accumulate, creating a more balanced picture of Sarah's capabilities. She was still among the weakest cadets in pure physical tests, but her performance in intellectual and technical challenges was consistently strong. More importantly, she was developing a reputation for thoroughness and attention to detail that some of her more physically gifted classmates lacked. Her instructors also began to notice the change. Sergeant Williams, who had initially seemed skeptical of her abilities, started calling on her more frequently during classroom discussions. Her thoughtful responses and willingness to ask probing questions that pushed beyond surface understanding impressed him, even if her physical performance remained merely adequate. The Academy's training program was designed to test cadets across multiple dimensions: physical, intellectual, emotional, and social. As Sarah progressed through her first semester, she was learning that success required finding ways to contribute meaningfully across all these areas, not just excelling in her areas of natural strength. This understanding would prove crucial as her training intensified and she faced increasingly complex challenges that would test not just individual skills, but her ability to perform under pressure as part of a team. The foundation she was building, slowly, painfully but with growing confidence, would soon be tested in ways she could never have anticipated. Winter arrived early at the academy, blanketing the training grounds in a thick layer of snow that transformed familiar landscapes into alien terrain. The harsh weather conditions added new layers of complexity to every exercise, from basic marksmanship to advanced tactical maneuvers. For Sarah, the winter months represented both additional challenges and unexpected opportunities to demonstrate capabilities that had been overlooked in more conventional training scenarios. The cold affected every cadet differently, but Sarah discovered that her smaller size, which had been such a liability during summer heat exercises, actually provided certain advantages in winter conditions. She required less food and water to maintain her energy levels, and her compact frame generated less body heat signature, a crucial factor during night operations and stealth exercises. These were subtle benefits that wouldn't show up on fitness reports, but they began to influence how tactical instructors assigned roles during winter training exercises. Captain Reynolds, the Academy's senior tactical instructor, was known for his demanding standards and creative exercise designs. He had served 3 combat tours overseas and brought real-world experience to training scenarios that often caught cadets off guard. Reynolds had been watching Sarah's progress with interest, noting the disconnect between her academic performance and her practical application scores. During a particularly challenging winter survival exercise, Reynolds assigned mixed-gender teams to test both individual resilience and group dynamics under stress. Sarah found herself paired with 3 male cadets: Morrison, whom she had navigated successfully during the night exercise; Rodriguez, a quiet but physically imposing cadet from New Mexico; and Thompson, whose academic struggles were as pronounced as his athletic abilities. The exercise parameters were deceptively simple. Each team would be dropped at different locations in the wilderness surrounding the academy with minimal equipment and 72 hours to reach a designated extraction point 15 miles away. They would face simulated enemy patrols, weather-related obstacles, and resource limitations designed to test their ability to work together under extreme stress. What the cadets didn't know was that Captain Reynolds had designed this exercise specifically to identify leadership potential in unexpected places. He deliberately created scenarios where conventional strengths like physical power or commanding presence might prove less valuable than adaptability, analytical thinking, and emotional intelligence. The first 12 hours tested everyone's limits. The temperature dropped to well below freezing, and the team's single sleeping bag had to be shared in shifts. Thompson, despite his physical strength, began showing signs of hypothermia faster than his teammates, his large frame losing heat rapidly in the bitter cold. Sarah, drawing on knowledge gained from extensive reading about survival techniques, recognized the early symptoms and immediately took action. "We need to get Thompson warmed up now, or he's going to become a real problem," she told Morrison, who had naturally assumed leadership of the group. Morrison looked skeptical. Thompson was still functioning and hadn't complained about being cold. "He seems fine to me. We need to keep moving if we're going to maintain our timeline." Sarah didn't argue, but she quietly began implementing warming strategies she had learned from survival manuals. She shared her rations with Thompson, knowing that his larger body needed more calories to maintain core temperature. She arranged their rest stops to take advantage of natural windbreaks and positioned Thompson in the middle of the group to benefit from shared body heat. By the second day, Thompson's condition had stabilized, though he remained more susceptible to the cold than the rest of the team. More importantly, the other team members had begun to notice Sarah's quiet but effective leadership in addressing practical problems they hadn't even recognized. When Rodriguez twisted his ankle while navigating a particularly treacherous slope, Sarah was the first to assess the injury and recommend a course of action. Her smaller size allowed her to examine the swollen joint more carefully, and her methodical approach to problem-solving helped them devise a way for Rodriguez to continue without compromising the mission timeline. "It's not broken, but it's a bad sprain," she announced after carefully testing the range of motion and checking for signs of fracture. "He can walk on it, but we need to modify our route to avoid the steeper terrain." Morrison initially resisted the suggestion, concerned about falling behind schedule, but when Sarah pulled out the topographical map and showed him an alternative route that would actually save time while providing easier footing for Rodriguez, he grudgingly agreed to the change. The new route proved to be not only easier on Rodriguez's injured ankle, but also more tactically sound. It provided better concealment from the simulated enemy patrols and led them past a natural water source that allowed them to refill their depleted canteens. What had started as an accommodation for an injured team member turned into a strategic advantage that improved their overall performance. These small victories began to shift the dynamics within the team. Morrison, who had started the exercise as the unquestioned leader, found himself increasingly deferring to Sarah's judgment on practical matters. Rodriguez, grateful for her quick thinking about his injury, began actively seeking her input on decisions. Even Thompson, who had initially seemed dismissive of her contributions, started paying close attention to her suggestions. The transformation wasn't immediately obvious. Sarah didn't become the group's designated leader in any formal sense. Instead, she evolved into what military theorists call an influence leader. someone who guides group decisions through expertise and insight rather than positional authority. Her teammates began to naturally look to her when problems arose, even while Morrison maintained his role as the official team leader. On the final day of the exercise, this dynamic was put to its most severe test. The team encountered a scenario that Captain Reynolds had designed to push them beyond their training and force them to improvise under extreme pressure. A simulated chemical attack had contaminated their planned route to the extraction point, forcing them to choose between a dangerous detour through enemy-controlled territory or attempting to neutralize the threat using improvised techniques. Morrison's instinct was to take the detour, accepting the additional risk of enemy contact rather than attempting something outside their established training. It was a reasonable decision that reflected proper military conservatism. When faced with uncertainty, choose the option that relies on known capabilities rather than unproven improvisation. Sarah studied the scenario parameters more carefully and reached a different conclusion. The simulated contamination was described as a chemical agent that would disperse naturally within several hours. Rather than choosing between two risky options, they could wait for the contamination to clear and proceed along their original route, with only a minor delay. "But that puts us behind schedule," Morrison objected when Sarah presented her analysis. "We're supposed to reach the extraction point by 1800 hours. The exercise parameters say we have to reach the extraction point within 72 hours, Sarah replied, consulting the written instructions. "They don't specify the exact time, just the deadline. If we wait 4 hours for the contamination to clear, we'll still make the deadline with time to spare." Her solution revealed something important about how different cadets approached problems. Morrison focused on meeting intermediate benchmarks and maintaining forward momentum, even when it increased overall risk. Sarah looked at the bigger picture and identified ways to achieve the ultimate objective with greater certainty of success. The team implemented Sarah's recommendation and successfully completed the exercise. More importantly, her approach demonstrated a type of tactical thinking that impressed Captain Reynolds when he conducted the after-action review. Instead of simply reacting to immediate pressures, she had analyzed the complete scenario and identified options that others had missed. Cadet Martinez showed excellent judgment under pressure, Reynolds noted in his evaluation. Her ability to see beyond immediate obstacles and identify creative solutions represents the kind of tactical thinking we want to develop in future officers. The positive evaluation from Captain Reynolds marked a significant shift in how Sarah was perceived by both instructors and fellow cadets. Word of her performance during the winter survival exercise spread throughout the academy, and she found herself being included in informal study groups and training sessions that had previously been closed to her. Jessica, her roommate, noticed the change immediately. "You're different," she observed one evening as they prepared for an upcoming examination on military law. "More confident. People are starting to see what I've been telling you was there all along." Sarah felt the difference too, though she was careful not to let increased confidence turn into overconfidence. She had learned that military service required a delicate balance. Enough self-assurance to make crucial decisions under pressure, but enough humility to continue learning from every experience. The spring semester brought new challenges as the Academy's training program intensified. Advanced courses in military engineering, battlefield medicine, and complex weapons systems tested every cadet's ability to master technical skills while maintaining the physical and mental standards expected of future officers. Sarah found herself particularly drawn to the battlefield medicine course, where her attention to detail and steady hands under pressure proved to be significant advantages. While some of her classmates struggled with the precise techniques required for emergency medical procedures, Sarah approached each skill methodically and practiced until she could perform them flawlessly even under simulated stress conditions. During one particularly realistic medical training scenario, Sarah was assigned to a team responding to a mass casualty situation. Multiple wounded cadets required simultaneous treatment for various injuries, and the exercise was designed to test both medical skills and triage decision-making under time pressure. The scenario coordinator, a medic with actual combat experience, watched as Sarah quickly assessed the casualties and began making treatment decisions. While other cadets focused on the most dramatic injuries, Sarah correctly identified which wounds were immediately life-threatening and which could wait for secondary treatment. Martinez, explain your triage decisions. The coordinator called out as she worked on a casualty with severe bleeding. This one has arterial bleeding that will cause death within minutes if not controlled, Sarah replied without stopping her work. The chest wound over there looks worse, but is actually stable for now. The head injury is serious, but not immediately life-threatening. We save the ones we can save quickly, then work on the rest. Her systematic approach to a chaotic situation impressed not only the instructor but also her fellow cadets, who had never seen Sarah perform with such authority and competence. It was a different kind of leadership than the commanding presence that came naturally to cadets like Morrison or Johnson, but it was equally effective in its own context. This performance in medical training opened new opportunities for Sarah to contribute to team exercises in ways that played to her strengths. Squad leaders began assigning her as the primary medic for field exercises, recognizing that her careful, methodical approach to emergency care made her more reliable than physically stronger teammates who might panic under pressure. The role of team medic also carried unexpected leadership responsibilities. When casualties occurred during exercises, the medic had to make quick decisions about evacuation procedures and treatment priorities that could affect the entire team's performance. Sarah found herself making critical choices that her teammates had to trust and follow, even when those decisions went against their instincts. During a particularly complex field exercise designed to simulate a reconnaissance mission behind enemy lines, Sarah's medical responsibilities became entangled with tactical decision-making in ways that tested her growing confidence. Her team was tasked with gathering intelligence on simulated enemy positions while avoiding detection by opposing forces played by instructors and senior cadets. 3 hours into the mission, Rodriguez, who had become one of Sarah's strongest supporters since the winter survival exercise, stepped in a camouflaged hole and suffered what appeared to be a serious ankle injury. The twisted joint swelled rapidly and couldn't bear weight, effectively immobilizing one of the team's strongest members. Morrison, still the designated team leader, wanted to call for immediate evacuation. It was the safe choice that would ensure Rodriguez received proper medical attention, but it would also terminate the mission and result in a failed exercise for the entire team. Sarah examined the injury more carefully and reached a different conclusion. It's a bad sprain, but not a fracture. He can't walk on it now, but with proper treatment and support, he might be able to continue the mission. That's a big risk, Morrison replied. If we're wrong about the severity, we could make the injury worse. Sarah understood the concern, but she also recognized that this was exactly the kind of decision-making challenge that separated competent medics from truly capable ones. In real combat situations, medical personnel often had to balance individual welfare against mission requirements, making difficult choices with incomplete information. "Give me 30 minutes, she requested. "If I can't get him mobile, we'll call for evacuation. But if I can stabilize the injury enough for him to continue, we complete the mission." Morrison agreed to the compromise, though his expression showed he still had doubts about the decision. Sarah immediately went to work with the limited medical supplies in their field kit, using techniques she had learned in class and practiced during countless training scenarios. She carefully wrapped Rodriguez's ankle with an elastic bandage, creating a support structure that would allow limited mobility while preventing further injury. She showed him how to use his rifle as an improvised crutch and worked with him to develop a modified walking technique that minimized stress on the injured joint. Most importantly, she helped Rodriguez manage the psychological aspect of continuing the mission while injured. Pain and fear of further injury could cause even experienced soldiers to make poor decisions, and Sarah recognized that addressing these concerns was just as important as treating the physical damage. "The wrapping will hold as long as you don't put full weight on it," she explained. "Use the rifle for support. Take your time and tell me immediately if the pain gets worse. We can still call for evacuation if we need to." Rodriguez tested the improvised support system and found he could move, albeit slowly and carefully. The team adjusted their tactical plan to accommodate his reduced mobility, and they successfully completed the reconnaissance mission within the allotted time frame. During the after-action review, the exercise evaluator specifically praised Sarah's medical decision-making and her ability to balance individual welfare with mission requirements. More significantly, he noted that her calm, methodical approach under pressure had helped keep the entire team focused and functional during a crisis situation. Good medics save lives, the evaluator observed. Great medics keep entire units operational. Cadet Martinez demonstrated the kind of judgment we want to see from future military leaders. The successful completion of the reconnaissance exercise, combined with her growing reputation for competence in medical emergencies, began to change how Sarah was perceived throughout the academy. Instructors who had initially seen her as marginal began to recognize her potential, and fellow cadets started seeking her out as a partner for challenging exercises. As Sarah entered her final semester at the academy, the training exercises became increasingly realistic and demanding. The culminating experience would be a 2-week field training exercise designed to simulate actual combat conditions as closely as possible without live ammunition. Every cadet understood that their performance during this final test would largely determine their initial assignments upon graduation and could influence their entire military career. The exercise, known officially as Operation Ironclad, would pit teams of cadets against each other in complex scenarios that required them to demonstrate mastery of everything they had learned during their time at the academy. Real military personnel would observe and evaluate every aspect of their performance. From individual tactical skills to group leadership dynamics, Sarah found herself assigned to Alpha Team under the leadership of Cadet Captain Morrison, who had been promoted to the highest cadet rank based on his consistent performance throughout their time at the academy. The team also included Rodriguez, whose ankle had healed completely and who had become one of Sarah's most reliable supporters, Thompson, who had developed into a competent soldier despite his initial struggles, and 6 other cadets representing a cross-section of the academy's student body. The initial briefing for Operation Ironclad was conducted by Colonel Harrison himself, the same officer who had questioned Sarah's suitability for military service during her entrance interview. He had watched her progress with interest, noting the discrepancy between his initial assessment and her actual performance. Now, as he outlined the exercise parameters, he found himself curious about how she would perform under the most realistic combat simulation the Academy could provide. This exercise will test everything you have learned about military leadership, tactical thinking, and performance under stress, Colonel Harrison announced to the assembled cadets. You will face scenarios designed to push you beyond your comfort zones and force you to make decisions with incomplete information and limited resources. Some of you will excel. Others will discover that military service may not be the right path for them. The teams would be inserted into a wilderness area that had been modified to simulate a hostile environment, complete with opposing forces, civilian populations, and complex political dynamics. Their missions would range from reconnaissance and surveillance to direct action raids, each designed to test different aspects of military capability. Sarah's team received their initial mission assignment during a pre-dawn briefing conducted in a temporary command post that had been established at the edge of the training area. Major Stevens, their control officer, outlined their first objective with the kind of precise detail that suggested real-world consequences. Alpha Team will conduct a reconnaissance mission to gather intelligence on enemy positions in Sector 7, Major Stevens explained, pointing to locations on a detailed map. Your target is a suspected command post located in this valley. You need to determine enemy strength, defensive positions, and communication capabilities without being detected. Any contact with enemy forces will be considered a mission failure. The mission parameters were straightforward, but Sarah immediately recognized several complicating factors that might not be obvious to her teammates. The target area included multiple approach routes, each with different risk profiles and intelligence-gathering opportunities. The weather forecast predicted morning fog that could provide concealment, but also limit visibility. Most importantly, the mission timeline required them to gather comprehensive intelligence and return to base within 36 hours, leaving little margin for error. Morrison led the initial planning session with characteristic thoroughness, but Sarah noticed that his approach focused primarily on the most direct route to the target with standard reconnaissance procedures. It was a competent plan that would probably succeed, but it wouldn't maximize their intelligence-gathering opportunities or account for some of the environmental factors that could affect their performance. What if we split into 2 observation teams? Sarah suggested during the planning discussion. One team takes the high ground here for visual reconnaissance, while the other gets closer to monitor their communications. We could gather more complete intelligence and have backup if one team runs into problems. Morrison considered the suggestion, but ultimately decided against it. Too complicated. We stick together and use standard procedures. Less chance of something going wrong. Sarah didn't argue the point, but she privately disagreed with the assessment. In her view, the split-team approach would actually reduce overall risk by providing redundancy and multiple sources of information. However, she recognized that Morrison was the designated leader, and his decision was final. The team moved out before dawn, using night vision equipment to navigate through terrain that would have been nearly impossible to traverse safely in complete darkness. Sarah carried the team's primary medical kit along with her standard combat load, and she had been designated as the secondary radio operator in case communication problems developed. The approach to the target area proceeded smoothly for the first several hours. Morrison's navigation was accurate, and the team maintained good noise discipline while moving through terrain that provided adequate concealment. By mid-morning, they had reached a position that offered clear observation of the valley where the suspected enemy command post was located. What they found exceeded their expectations in terms of complexity and potential intelligence value. The enemy position was not simply a command post, but appeared to be a major logistics hub with multiple buildings, vehicle parks, and communication arrays. Personnel movement suggested a significant enemy presence, possibly including senior leadership elements that would be valuable targets for future operations. Morrison established their observation post according to standard procedures, positioning team members to provide security while maintaining visual surveillance of the target area. Sarah was assigned to monitor enemy communications using the team's electronic surveillance equipment, a task that required both technical skill and the ability to analyze and interpret intercepted signals. As she began monitoring enemy radio traffic, Sarah quickly realized that they had stumbled onto something much more significant than a routine command post. The communications she was intercepting suggested that a major enemy operation was being planned, with coordination between multiple units and what appeared to be a timeline for execution within the next 48 hours. "Morrison, you need to hear this," Sarah called quietly, gesturing for the team leader to join her at the communication monitoring station. She played back several intercepted radio conversations that clearly indicated the enemy was planning a large-scale assault on friendly forces in a different sector. The timing and scope of the planned attack would catch friendly forces completely off guard and could result in significant casualties if advance warning wasn't provided. Morrison listened to the intercepted communications with growing concern. The intelligence they had gathered was far more important than anyone had anticipated, but it also created a dilemma about how to proceed. Their mission was to conduct reconnaissance and return with intelligence, not to take action based on what they discovered. "We need to report this immediately," Morrison decided. "This intelligence is too important to wait for the scheduled communication window." Sarah agreed with the assessment, but she also recognized that immediate communication would reveal their position and potentially compromise their mission. Enemy forces would know they had been under surveillance, and might take countermeasures that would reduce the value of the intelligence they had gathered. "What if we gather more intelligence first?" Sarah suggested. "If we can determine exact timing and force composition, the intelligence will be much more valuable. We could wait until tonight to transmit everything at once." Morrison faced exactly the kind of decision that Operation Ironclad was designed to test, balancing immediate needs against potential future benefits, with incomplete information and time pressure affecting every choice. His decision would reveal important things about his leadership style and judgment under pressure. After several minutes of consideration, Morrison decided to continue the reconnaissance mission and gather additional intelligence before reporting their findings. It was a reasonable decision that balanced risk against potential intelligence value, but it also meant the team would remain in position longer than originally planned. The extended observation period proved valuable, but also increased their exposure to detection by enemy forces. As the day progressed, Sarah noticed increased enemy patrol activity in areas that could potentially compromise their observation post. The enemy appeared to be conducting counter-reconnaissance operations, actively searching for the kind of surveillance that Alpha Team was conducting. "They know someone is watching," Sarah reported to Morrison. "Patrol patterns have changed, and they're checking areas that would be good observation points. We may need to relocate soon." Morrison observed the enemy activity for himself and reached the same conclusion. Their current position, while excellent for observation, was becoming increasingly dangerous as enemy forces expanded their search patterns. They would need to find a new location that provided continued surveillance capability, while reducing their risk of detection. Sarah had been studying the terrain around their position and had identified several alternative locations that might work. One in particular offered excellent concealment and good fields of observation, but it would require moving during daylight hours when they would be most vulnerable to detection. "There's a position about 500 meters to the east that would work," Sarah explained, showing Morrison the location on their map. "Natural concealment, good sight lines to the target, and multiple escape routes if we need them. But we'd have to move now, while enemy patrols are in other areas." The proposed move represented another calculated risk, trading their current known position for a potentially better but unconfirmed location, with movement during daylight increasing their chances of detection. Morrison studied the map carefully, considering factors that Sarah might not have fully evaluated. "Show me the exact route," Morrison requested. "If we're going to do this, we need to minimize exposure time and have contingency plans if things go wrong." Sarah outlined her proposed movement plan, demonstrating the kind of detailed tactical thinking that had become her trademark during training exercises. She had identified terrain features that would provide concealment during movement, calculated timing to avoid enemy patrol schedules, and established rally points where the team could regroup if they were separated during the move. Morrison approved the plan, and Alpha Team began their carefully coordinated movement to the new observation position. The relocation proceeded smoothly, with each team member moving individually using terrain features and natural concealment to avoid detection. Sarah's route selection proved to be excellent, providing adequate cover while minimizing the time they spent exposed to enemy observation. The new position exceeded expectations in terms of both concealment and observation capability. From their upgraded vantage point, they could see not only the main command post but also previously hidden areas that revealed the true scope of enemy operations in the valley. Most importantly, they were now close enough to monitor enemy communications more effectively, providing access to detailed information about the planned assault. Over the next several hours, Sarah intercepted and recorded extensive enemy radio traffic that provided a comprehensive picture of the planned operation. Enemy forces were coordinating a multi-pronged assault that would begin at dawn the following day, involving 3 separate units attacking from different directions in a coordinated effort to overwhelm friendly defensive positions. The intelligence they had gathered was far more detailed and valuable than anyone could have anticipated when the mission began. However, their extended time in the target area had also increased their own risk significantly. Enemy counter-reconnaissance efforts were intensifying, and it was becoming increasingly difficult to remain undetected while gathering the detailed intelligence that made their mission so valuable. As evening approached, Morrison faced another crucial decision about when and how to extract from their current position while ensuring the intelligence they had gathered reached friendly forces in time to be actionable. The enemy assault was scheduled to begin in approximately 10 hours, leaving little margin for delays or communication problems. Sarah had been monitoring enemy communications continuously and had noticed subtle changes that suggested their surveillance might have been detected. While enemy forces hadn't pinpointed their exact location, increased radio chatter and modified patrol patterns indicated heightened awareness of potential observation. "I think they know we're here," Sarah reported quietly. "Not our exact position, but they're definitely looking for us more systematically. If we're going to extract, we should do it soon." Morrison agreed with her assessment, but he was reluctant to leave when they were still gathering valuable intelligence. Every additional hour of surveillance provided more detailed information about enemy plans, but it also increased their risk of detection and capture. The decision was made for them when Rodriguez, who was providing security watch from a concealed position 50 meters away, signaled that he had spotted an enemy patrol moving directly toward their location. The patrol consisted of at least 6 personnel with what appeared to be detection equipment, suggesting a deliberate search rather than a routine patrol. Alpha Team had perhaps 10 minutes before the enemy patrol would reach their position. They could attempt to remain hidden and hope the patrol passed by without detecting them, or they could begin an immediate extraction that would guarantee their escape but might compromise the intelligence they had gathered. Sarah quickly assessed their options while Morrison made the final decision about how to proceed. The choice they made would determine not only their success or failure in this particular exercise, but would also test their ability to perform under the kind of pressure they might face in actual combat situations. Morrison made the decision to extract immediately, rather than risk capture and loss of the vital intelligence they had gathered. Alpha Team began a carefully coordinated withdrawal from their observation position, using predetermined routes and communication signals to maintain security while moving away from the approaching enemy patrol. The extraction proceeded smoothly initially, but as they moved through terrain that offered less concealment than their approach route, they encountered an unexpected complication. A second enemy patrol, apparently coordinating with the first group in a systematic search pattern, was positioned directly along their planned extraction route. Alpha Team found themselves caught between two enemy forces with limited options for avoiding detection. Morrison quickly called for a halt and gathered his team leaders to assess their options. "We've got patrols front and back," Morrison whispered during their hasty conference. "We can try to go around them, but that means moving through open ground where we'll be exposed. Or we can wait here and hope they move on, but that risks both patrols converging on our position." Sarah studied their tactical situation and identified a third option that Morrison hadn't considered. The terrain they currently occupied included a small ravine that ran perpendicular to both enemy patrol routes. If they could move along the ravine without being detected, they could bypass both patrols while remaining concealed. "What about the ravine?" Sarah suggested, pointing to the terrain feature on their map. "It looks like it runs for about 800 meters before opening onto higher ground. We could follow it around both patrols." Morrison examined the proposal carefully. The ravine would provide concealment, but it would also channel their movement along a predictable route that could become a trap if enemy forces discovered their presence. Additionally, they didn't know if the ravine was passable for its entire length, or if they would encounter obstacles that would force them into the open. "Too risky," Morrison decided. "If they spot us in that ravine, we'll have nowhere to go. We'll wait 30 minutes for the patrols to move on, then extract using our original route." Sarah respected Morrison's decision as team leader, but her tactical instincts suggested that remaining stationary was actually the higher-risk option. Enemy search patterns were becoming more systematic and thorough, making it increasingly likely that their position would be discovered if they stayed in one place too long. The 30-minute wait seemed to last hours as Alpha Team maintained silent watch while enemy patrols continued their search activities in the surrounding area. Sarah monitored enemy communications and noted with growing concern that the search was expanding and becoming more coordinated. Additional enemy units were being brought in to assist with what had clearly become a priority mission to locate and capture the surveillance team. "Morrison," Sarah whispered urgently, "they're bringing in more units. I'm hearing references to at least 4 different patrols now, and they're coordinating search sectors. If we stay here much longer, they're going to find us." Before Morrison could respond to Sarah's warning, Rodriguez signaled from his security position that enemy forces were approaching their location from a new direction. The systematic search had led enemy patrols to begin checking areas they had previously considered unlikely hiding spots, including the terrain where Alpha Team had taken refuge. Morrison realized that their tactical situation had deteriorated beyond the point where passive waiting was viable. They needed to move immediately, but their original extraction route was still blocked by enemy patrols. The ravine option that Sarah had proposed earlier was beginning to look like their best available choice. "We're going with the ravine plan," Morrison decided quietly. "Sarah, you take point. Since it was your idea, if you spot any problems, signal immediately and we'll find another way." Sarah accepted the responsibility without hesitation, though she understood the significance of Morrison's decision. By putting her in the lead position, he was demonstrating trust in her tactical judgment, while also making her accountable for the success or failure of the extraction route she had proposed. Moving through the ravine required different skills than the open-terrain navigation they had been using during most of the exercise. The narrow confines demanded careful attention to noise discipline, while loose rocks and unstable footing created constant risks of injury or detection. Energy. Sarah found that her smaller size was actually advantageous in the cramped conditions, allowing her to move more quietly and easily than her larger teammates. As they progressed along the ravine, Sarah's attention to detail revealed several potential problems that could have compromised their movement. She spotted tripwires that had been placed to detect movement along obvious routes, and she identified areas where the terrain channeled sound in ways that would carry noise to enemy positions. Her careful route selection and movement techniques kept the team concealed while making steady progress toward their extraction point. Halfway through the ravine passage, Sarah encountered an obstacle that threatened to stop their movement entirely. A section of the ravine had been partially blocked by fallen rocks and debris, creating a choke point that would require careful navigation to pass through without making noise or becoming exposed to observation from higher ground. Sarah studied the obstacle carefully, identifying handholds and footing that would allow passage while minimizing noise and exposure time. She then guided each team member through the difficult section individually, providing whispered instructions and physical assistance to ensure everyone could negotiate the obstacle safely. Thompson, whose size made the passage particularly challenging, required additional assistance to avoid becoming stuck or making excessive noise. Sarah worked with him patiently, showing him exactly where to place his hands and feet, while helping to guide his movement through the most difficult sections. "Thanks," Thompson whispered as he cleared the final obstacle. "I never would have made it through there on my own." The comment reflected a significant change in Thompson's attitude toward Sarah's capabilities. Early in their training, he had been among the most skeptical about her suitability for military service. Now, faced with a situation where her skills were directly relevant to their success, he was expressing genuine gratitude for her assistance. Alpha Team successfully navigated the complete length of the ravine and emerged onto higher ground that offered multiple route options for the final portion of their extraction. Sarah's tactical assessment had proven accurate. The ravine provided the concealment and security they needed to bypass enemy search patterns without detection. With enemy patrols now behind them and open terrain ahead, Morrison resumed his role as primary navigator for the final movement to their extraction point. The team made excellent time across terrain that offered good visibility and multiple route options, reaching their designated rally point well ahead of schedule. The successful extraction allowed Alpha Team to deliver their intelligence to friendly forces with enough time for the information to be analyzed and acted upon before the enemy assault began. The detailed communications intercepts that Sarah had gathered provided commanders with precise information about enemy timing, force composition, and attack routes. Intelligence that would allow friendly forces to prepare effective defensive measures. During the mission debriefing, Major Stevens specifically praised the team's decision-making under pressure and their ability to adapt to changing tactical conditions. More importantly, he noted that their intelligence gathering had exceeded all expectations and provided information that would significantly impact the overall exercise scenario. Alpha Team's performance demonstrates the kind of tactical thinking and adaptability we expect from future military leaders, Major Stevens observed during his evaluation. Your ability to balance risk against intelligence value, combined with innovative problem-solving when faced with unexpected obstacles, represents exactly what we're trying to develop through this training program. The successful reconnaissance mission established Alpha Team as one of the top-performing units in Operation Ironclad, but it also set higher expectations for their performance in subsequent missions. Their next assignment would test different aspects of their capabilities, while building on the confidence and teamwork they had developed during their first operation. Sarah's role in the mission's success had been significant but subtle. Her communications intelligence gathering, tactical route planning, and problem-solving during the extraction had all contributed to their overall effectiveness. More importantly, she had demonstrated the kind of leadership that comes from expertise and reliability rather than formal authority, earning the respect and trust of teammates who had initially doubted her capabilities. The second mission assignment came 48 hours later, after Alpha Team had been given time to rest, resupply, and analyze lessons learned from their reconnaissance operation. This time, they would be conducting a direct action raid against a high-value target, requiring them to shift from passive observation to active engagement with enemy forces. Major Stevens outlined their new mission with the same precise detail that had characterized their first briefing, but the complexity and risk level were significantly higher. Alpha Team would be responsible for capturing or neutralizing a high-ranking enemy officer who was reportedly visiting a forward position for a planning conference with subordinate commanders. The target location is a fortified compound with significant defensive positions and an unknown number of enemy personnel, Major Stevens explained. Intelligence suggests the high-value target will be present for approximately 6 hours, giving you a narrow window for the operation. Success requires speed, precision, and flawless execution. The mission parameters left little room for error or extended planning. Alpha Team would have to conduct reconnaissance of the target area, develop a tactical plan, execute the raid, and extract with their objective within a compressed timeline that would test their ability to perform under extreme pressure. Morrison approached the planning process with characteristic thoroughness, but Sarah noticed that his methodical style might not be well suited to the rapid decision-making required by their new mission. The time constraints meant they would have to make many tactical decisions based on incomplete information, requiring a more flexible and adaptive approach than their previous operation. Sarah found herself taking a more active role in the planning process, contributing tactical options and contingency plans that Morrison might not have considered. Her suggestions were increasingly being incorporated into their overall operational plan, reflecting the team's growing confidence in her judgment. "What if the compound has more defenders than intelligence suggests?" Sarah asked during one planning session. "We should have contingency plans for different enemy strength levels, not just the best-case scenario." Morrison agreed with her concern and tasked her with developing alternative tactical approaches based on different threat scenarios. The assignment represented another significant increase in Sarah's responsibilities and demonstrated Morrison's willingness to delegate important planning tasks to team members whose expertise he had learned to trust. As Alpha Team prepared for their most challenging mission yet, Sarah reflected on how much had changed since her arrival at the academy. The uncertain cadet who had struggled with basic training requirements had evolved into a confident and capable team member whose contributions were actively sought by her leaders and teammates. The transformation hadn't happened overnight, and it had required her to overcome not only external challenges, but also her own self-doubt and the limiting expectations that others had placed on her capabilities. Most importantly, she had learned that effective military leadership came in many different forms, and that her particular combination of analytical thinking, attention to detail, and calm performance under pressure represented a valuable and necessary component of team effectiveness. Operation Ironclad's final challenges would test whether these lessons had truly prepared her for the kind of high-stakes decision-making that characterized real military operations. The direct action mission would require her to demonstrate not only technical competence, but also the kind of courage and leadership that could only be tested under the most demanding circumstances. The upcoming raid would push Alpha Team beyond anything they had experienced during their academy training, but Sarah approached it with a confidence that was based on hard-earned experience rather than untested assumptions. She had proven herself capable of contributing meaningfully to mission success, and she was ready to accept whatever responsibilities her team's success might require. As they conducted their final equipment checks and rehearsed their tactical procedures, Sarah realized that she was no longer thinking of herself as someone who might not belong in military service. Instead, she was focused entirely on ensuring that her team's next mission would be executed with the same precision and effectiveness that had characterized their previous success. The transformation was complete. From uncertain cadet to confident team member, ready to face whatever challenges Operation Ironclad's climactic test might present. The morning of Alpha Team's direct action raid dawned cold and overcast, with low-hanging clouds that would provide excellent concealment for their approach, but also limited visibility for target identification. Sarah conducted her final equipment checks with the methodical precision that had become her trademark, ensuring that every piece of gear was properly positioned and functional before the team moved out. Morrison had accepted her recommendation to approach the target compound from the north, using a dry creek bed that would provide concealment until they reached the final assault position. The plan was aggressive but carefully calculated, designed to achieve surprise while maintaining multiple options for extraction if the situation developed unexpectedly. As Alpha Team moved through the pre-dawn darkness toward their objective, Sarah found herself assigned to the crucial role of breacher, responsible for creating entry points into the target building where the high-value enemy officer was reportedly located. It was a position that required both technical skill and the ability to perform precise tasks under extreme stress, and Morrison's assignment of the role to Sarah reflected his complete confidence in her capabilities. The approach to the compound proceeded smoothly, with the team maintaining excellent noise discipline while covering the 3 kilometers from their insertion point to the target area. Sarah's navigation proved accurate, and they reached their final assault position exactly on schedule, with no indication that their movement had been detected by enemy forces. From their concealed position overlooking the compound, Alpha Team conducted a final reconnaissance to confirm intelligence estimates and identify any changes in defensive positions or personnel strength. What they observed was both encouraging and concerning. The compound appeared to be lightly defended as intelligence had suggested, but the layout was more complex than anticipated, with multiple buildings and potential hiding places for their target. Morrison made the decision to proceed with their original plan despite the increased complexity, trusting that his team's training and adaptability would allow them to handle unexpected developments. He assigned Sarah to breach the main building, while Rodriguez and Thompson secured the perimeter, and he would lead the search for their high-value target once entry had been achieved. At exactly 0530 hours, Alpha Team initiated their assault. Sarah moved quickly but carefully toward the main building, carrying the specialized equipment needed to create a silent entry without alerting defenders who might be sleeping inside. Her hands were steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system, and she found herself thinking clearly about each step of the breaching process. The door mechanism was more sophisticated than they had anticipated, requiring Sarah to adapt her techniques to overcome security measures that hadn't appeared in their intelligence briefings. Instead of panicking or rushing the process, she took the additional time needed to properly defeat the locking system while maintaining the operational silence that was essential for mission success. Her careful work paid off when the door opened without noise or damage that would indicate forced entry. Sarah signaled the all-clear to Morrison, who immediately led his search team into the building while Rodriguez and Thompson maintained security positions outside. What happened next caught everyone completely off guard. The compound wasn't just lightly defended. It was the center of a carefully planned ambush designed to capture or eliminate any friendly forces attempting to raid the facility. The high-value target was indeed present, but he was there specifically to lure Alpha Team into a trap that had been prepared based on detailed intelligence about their capabilities and likely tactics. The moment Morrison's team entered the main building, concealed enemy positions around the compound opened fire with coordinated precision. Rodriguez and Thompson, caught in the open while providing perimeter security, were immediately pinned down by accurate fire from multiple directions. Morrison and his search team found themselves trapped inside the building with no clear route for extraction. Sarah, who had been moving to her next assigned position when the ambush began, suddenly found herself in the unique situation of being the only team member who was not under direct enemy fire. Her position near the building's rear entrance gave her concealment from the main enemy firing positions while allowing her to observe the tactical situation developing around her. In the space of 30 seconds, Alpha Team had gone from executing a carefully planned raid to fighting for survival against a numerically superior enemy force that had every tactical advantage. Morrison, Rodriguez, and Thompson were all pinned down in positions where they couldn't effectively return fire or coordinate their response, and enemy forces were already moving to surround the compound and eliminate any possibility of escape. For Sarah, this moment represented the ultimate test of everything she had learned during her time at the academy. All of her training in tactical decision-making, medical procedures, and leadership under pressure suddenly became directly relevant to the survival of her teammates and the success of their mission. Her first priority was to assess the complete tactical situation and identify options for breaking the ambush before enemy forces could consolidate their advantage. She could see muzzle flashes from at least 6 different firing positions, suggesting that Alpha Team was outnumbered by at least 2-1. More concerning, enemy forces appeared to be moving in coordinated teams to surround the compound and cut off all escape routes. Sarah realized that conventional tactics would not be sufficient to extract her team from their desperate situation. Enemy forces had anticipated standard small unit responses and had positioned themselves to counter those tactics. Success would require her to do something unexpected, something that would disrupt enemy coordination and create opportunities for her teammates to break free from their current positions. Drawing on her knowledge of enemy psychology and tactical doctrine, Sarah identified the enemy command element that appeared to be coordinating the ambush from a concealed position on the compound's eastern perimeter. If she could neutralize or disrupt that command element, the coordinated enemy response would likely deteriorate into individual fighting positions that her teammates could deal with more effectively. The approach to the enemy command position would require Sarah to cross open ground while under potential observation from multiple enemy positions, It was exactly the kind of high-risk, high-reward action that went against everything she had been taught about proper tactical procedures, but it might be the only way to save her team. Without waiting for orders that couldn't come under the current circumstances, Sarah began moving toward the enemy command position, using terrain features and buildings for concealment. Her small size and careful movement techniques allowed her to advance without being detected, but she knew that her window of opportunity was closing rapidly, as enemy forces continued to strengthen their positions around the trapped members of her team. As she approached the enemy command position, Sarah could hear radio communications that confirmed her tactical assessment. The ambush was being controlled from this location, with a senior enemy leader directing the movements of subordinate units. More importantly, she could see that the position was occupied by only 2 personnel who were focused entirely on coordinating the attack rather than providing security for their own location. Sarah had trained extensively in close-quarters combat techniques, but she had never been required to use those skills against live opponents in a real tactical situation. The enemy personnel were larger and potentially more experienced than she was, but they were completely focused on their radios and unaware of her approach. She would have the advantage of surprise, but only for the few seconds it would take to close the distance and engage them directly. Her attack on the enemy command position was swift and decisive. Using techniques she had practiced hundreds of times during training, Sarah neutralized both enemy personnel before they could raise an alarm or call for assistance. More importantly, she gained control of their radio equipment, giving her the ability to monitor and potentially disrupt enemy communications. The loss of command coordination immediately affected enemy tactical performance around the compound. Instead of continuing their coordinated assault, individual enemy positions began acting independently, making tactical decisions based on their limited local perspective rather than overall situational awareness. This breakdown in coordination created exactly the opportunities Alpha Team needed to begin fighting their way out of the ambush. Sarah quickly assessed the radio traffic and identified the frequencies being used by different enemy units. Using her knowledge of enemy tactical procedures, she began transmitting false orders that created confusion and conflicting directives among the remaining enemy forces. Her deception efforts caused several enemy units to abandon strong positions or redeploy to areas where they could not effectively engage Alpha Team. With enemy coordination disrupted and some firing positions abandoned, Morrison was able to lead his team out of the building where they had been trapped. Rodriguez and Thompson, no longer under concentrated fire, could provide covering fire while moving to more defensible positions. For the first time since the ambush began, Alpha Team had regained some tactical initiative. Sarah continued her deception operations from the captured enemy command position, using her understanding of military communications protocols to create maximum confusion among the remaining enemy forces. She ordered some units to withdraw to defensive positions, directed others to areas where no friendly forces were located, and generally created enough chaos to prevent any coordinated enemy response to Alpha Team's breakout attempts. Her teammates, realizing that someone was disrupting enemy communications but unable to identify who was responsible, took advantage of the confusion to consolidate their positions and prepare for extraction. Morrison attempted to re-establish communication with Sarah, but her radio had been damaged during her assault on the enemy command position. Working without direct coordination with her teammates, Sarah had to make tactical decisions based on her observation of their movements and her assessment of overall battlefield conditions. She continued her deception efforts while also providing direct fire support against enemy positions that were still engaging Alpha Team members. The turning point came when Sarah identified an enemy reinforcement unit that was moving to cut off Alpha Team's most likely extraction route. Using the captured enemy radio, she transmitted orders directing the reinforcement unit to a completely different area, claiming that friendly forces had been spotted in that location and required immediate attention. The deception worked perfectly, drawing the enemy reinforcements away from the extraction route and opening a clear path for Alpha Team to withdraw from the compound area. Morrison, recognizing the opportunity, immediately began moving his team toward the extraction point, while Sarah provided overwatch and continued her communication deception efforts. Sarah's actions had not only broken the enemy ambush, but had also turned a potential disaster into a successful mission completion. Alpha Team had accomplished their original objective, The high-value enemy target had been located and could have been captured if not for the ambush situation. More importantly, they had demonstrated the kind of adaptability and courage under fire that represented the highest standards of military performance. The extraction proceeded smoothly, with Sarah rejoining her teammates at the rally point after ensuring that her deception efforts had created enough confusion to prevent any organized enemy pursuit. As Alpha Team moved toward their final extraction point, Morrison expressed his amazement at Sarah's actions during the critical moments of the ambush. "I still can't believe what you did back there," Morrison told her during a brief rest halt. "Taking out their command post and turning their own communications against them, that was incredible thinking under pressure." Sarah's response reflected the confidence and maturity she had developed through her academy experience. "We trained as a team, and teams don't leave anyone behind. I just did what needed to be done." The mission debriefing conducted after Alpha Team's return revealed the full scope of what Sarah had accomplished during the ambush. Exercise controllers confirmed that her assault on the enemy command position had been perfectly executed, and that her subsequent deception operations had caused the complete breakdown of enemy tactical coordination. Colonel Harrison, who had initially questioned Sarah's suitability for military service, personally conducted her evaluation interview. His assessment was unqualified in its praise for her performance under the most demanding circumstances the Academy could provide. "Cadet Martinez, your actions during Operation Ironclad represent exactly the kind of leadership and tactical thinking we want to develop in future military officers," Colonel Harrison stated. "Your ability to assess a desperate situation, identify unconventional solutions, and execute those solutions under extreme pressure demonstrates that you possess the fundamental qualities necessary for military leadership." The successful completion of Operation Ironclad marked the end of Sarah's academy training, but it also marked the beginning of her recognition as one of the most promising graduates in her class. Her transformation from uncertain cadet to proven leader had been completed under the most realistic combat conditions the academy could provide. As she prepared for graduation and her first assignment as a commissioned officer, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. The small, uncertain young woman who had arrived at the academy feeling like an imposter had evolved into a confident military leader whose capabilities had been proven under the most demanding circumstances. More importantly, Sarah's experience had demonstrated that effective military leadership came in many forms, and that the qualities she possessed, analytical thinking, attention to detail, calm performance under pressure, and the courage to take necessary action when others couldn't, represented essential components of military effectiveness. Her story would become part of Academy legend, inspiring future cadets who might doubt their own capabilities or feel that they didn't fit the traditional military mold. Sarah Martinez had proven that determination, intelligence, and courage were more important than physical size or conventional presence, and that true leadership revealed itself most clearly when everything was at stake and conventional approaches weren't sufficient. The cadet they had seen as just a small woman had single-handedly saved her unit when it mattered most, demonstrating that the most important battles are often won by those who refuse to accept limitations and find ways to turn their unique capabilities into decisive advantages.